Hi, PJ. Welcome to Revolutionary Journey.
Hey, Carolina, thank you so much. Excited for the topic today.
What are we going to talk about today?
So I figured we talk about one thing that's definitely been on my entire career, which is this corporate bullshit, right? Sifting through it in a semi-smart way. Is that
Yes,
possible?
I
If
know.
it is, how do you do it? Things like that.
That's a great thing. It's like it is an interesting thing, and I recently have been reading about it. Every company has their own corporate algorithms, if you will, and a lot of that is just bullshit. So, how do you deal with it? How do you know what is important and what is not important? How do you show up that in a way that works for you and for the company where you work in? And that Yeah, I guess there's a lot of topics we could dig into there, but let's start with that. What is your experience there? How much of this are you willing to take, and what are the boundaries that you found for your professional
Yeah.
career?
Great question. Early in my career, I thought I could be immune to it, meaning I didn't have to play. That's a game I don't want to play. But what I realized as my career went on is that not being an active participant is you playing a game. It's you falling into a role, being a bit more submissive. About 6 years into my career, I started to make qualms with the fact that corporate politics were not a bug, it was more of a feature systemically designed to help move things forward, right? There's this equation that I'm going to butcher it, but it's like corporate politics equals many colleagues plus limited resources
Mm-mm.
plus these pick me kind of personalities, right? So that equals corporate politics. And that hasn't really left my mind. I guess how I deal with it understanding the fact that it's a reality, especially if you
Mm-mm.
don't own your own company, especially if you're working with larger companies. So I just make qualms of like, okay, I'm gonna have to engage with this to a certain degree. And then the next question becomes, how can I do that and still sit within my ethos, sit within my
Yeah.
authenticity? So that's really, I just frame it that way. How about you?
No, I agree. I agree with you. I think that there's some very important topics that you found there. And recently, I have been reading this book, which is called Conscious Business, and I loved it. And there's this part which really resonated with me. When you think about how you live your life, you can either be the player where you play the game, and whatever that game is, the more freedom you have in your personal and work life, you can design the rules a bit better. Or you can be the victim and always saying it's just what happens and this is how it is. The part of all this corporate bullshit that happens in a lot of companies, because let's be honest, it is the big corporations. But the same thing happens in startups, right? There is companies that like there is just a certain ways every company does things, right? That's part of it, right? That's part of this. There's certain people who make decisions. There's certain things that need to be done, like because people are used to it. Doesn't mean you cannot change them, but you have to understand what are the rules of the game we are playing here, and then it's up to you to decide how do you play that game and which parts do you want to play and which parts do you want to say like, hey, no, this I don't want to play those games here anymore. But
Yeah,
then you need to plan your exit, right? so,
exactly.
so the essence here is this is going to happen no matter where you work, no matter what you do. There's always going to be some games that you play, and you need to decide whether you're going to be an active player in those games or if you're going to just be a person that says, this is not my problem. The
Yeah,
thing is, if it bothers you, it is your problem because no one is going to fix it for you, right? So that's maybe the part that I think is very important and for both you and me, and we agree on that, that if you want to be more living in line with who you are, you cannot wait for someone else to save you. No, no, that's not going to happen. You have to deal with it yourself.
exactly. Yeah. And it reinforces this, having no opinion is an opinion, right? And
Absolutely.
so,
Yeah.
so it's like, that you need to get a budget approved, right? And you just don't want to go through the rigmarole of pulling all this data and stuff. It's just sensical. We need to achieve X, so we need capital for that. Why go through the rigmarole of presenting this, getting buy-in, and all of that? There was this meme when I was doing a bit of research on this topic of how many people, and this is an old meme. How many people does it take to approve a ink cartridge for an office? And they're like 50. And they're like, yeah, one to actually sign off on the purchase order and 49 to discuss what type of ink cartridge it should be,
Yeah.
which vendor and all that stuff. It resonated because I've seen companies where, even to provision a laptop, it took 13 people's input. I'm like, guys, come on, this is a new employee. So
Yeah.
it's like, do I really need to approve this?
Yeah, sometimes it's just really silly things that, on one hand, you would say, like, okay, there's silly rules within the company, but you also need to understand those rules are there for a reason. It's kind of like purchasing the laptop thing. I had this very often with young engineers who join the team, and they're like, no, 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 everything that you have to offer is not acceptable. I want my own equipment because I like to work a certain way. This is what I need to do my work. If you want me to deliver my best work, give me what I want. And I'm a bit always like, okay, man, just deal with it. It's like this, if it doesn't sit you, get your own stuff. And when you work from home, nobody minds what you work on. You have your laptop and so on, but you can have your own keyboard. Don't expect people to get it for you just because, you're some, sorry, I'm not going to be like very dismissive, babe, but sometimes there's like those divas, right? There's
Yeah,
like, oh my
exactly.
goodness, this is what I need to do my work. Just deal with it. You're not getting that. The reason is that when you think of like, yeah, but this is what I need. But then you think like, okay, but look, this company has 1,000 employees. What does that mean? That means that the IT team has to serve at least 10 people each and take care of all the equipment. When you start understanding those boundaries and those systems, like, okay, fine, like, they need some sort of standardization. If everyone wants something different, that doesn't make sense, right? So this is part of this sometimes annoying game that you play in the company, but you have to understand that those limits are there not to minimize your input, but they're there for a reason. Sometimes
Exactly.
they're for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose you could equip someone to say, hey, you have every right to be curious about the process or ask, be asked for a reason on why you can't have X laptop, right? I think that's
Yeah.
perfectly reasonable. But to expect it and to, in the if I ever had somebody come to me and said, I need this laptop in order to deliver, and be like, okay, so you're telling me when it comes to performance reviews that I should be rewarding the tool and not the talent.
This is, but the thing is that you
Yes.
cannot imagine how many times I've had this conversation. Interestingly, it's most of the times rather junior engineers who have this brain. But okay, it's a
Yeah.
side topic. Yeah. So, yeah.
No. I think it's needed. Yes. Politics, let's maybe not confuse it with bureaucracy. These are needed and there's rationale behind it. But politics itself, things that actually hurt and hinder progress and
Mm.
innovation, this is maybe the topic that I'm interested in because it's been my experience, and there's a lot of research on office politics, that
Mhm.
if you have too much or even too little of it, it can hinder the service or the product to a very bottom line degree, right? So
No, absolutely. And I think that part of it is like, at the end of the day, what the office politics comes to is always the clear, like knowing who makes decisions about what.
yeah,
And what I found is in many organizations, that clarity of like who gets to make a decision about what is not always very clear. On one hand, it's about ownership and enabling people to make their decision within like certain boundaries and so on, and knowing what to do, how to do it, and when they need other input. That input being maybe a bigger view, a more let's say broader view of the organization that they might not understand from where they are, and then they need to ask for help. And so that's one thing. It's like just creating this place within the company that as much as possible of the decisions can be done by people who are actually need to deal with that problem.
Yep.
But then on the other hand, what happens is that in some organization, this ownership is sort of it's interesting because for me, ownership means you own what you are, the part of the work, the product, or whatever that we give to you, and you have the mandate to make decisions around that part of the work. And in some companies when I work with, it was the definition of ownership was like, I tell you what to do and you do it. I'm like, that's not really ownership. That was a very different mindset and setup.
that's obedience, not ownership.
Yes. Yes.
Different
Yeah.
O word.
Yeah. Yeah. But so then, and where does it came from? Because there's sometimes it so happens that there is a unwillingness to let go of the decision-making process, right?
It's this control thing, right? I've had the opportunity to work with different leaders, different executives that have varying degrees of control, right? One of the best relationships I had was somebody who said, listen, we hired you for a reason. You're an expert in this. I don't want you to email me about a budget less than this or talk to me at a budget less than this. So like they knew they had a certain threshold, right? And they were able to communicate that. And then conversely, I also had a manager who was like, I want to approve every, this was back in early 2010s. When you're approving a paper order, you do have to gauge how the leaders above and beside you like to take in information. And there is going to be a sense, or there's going to be a need for you to make them feel good, and emphasis on the feel, right? And for me,
Yeah.
I'm like, that's where I struggle. I'm like, why can't you just feel good on your own and
Mm.
not take this as seriously as it
I
is?
think there's this part of like, that it's what maybe I have my boundaries when I feel like I need to make people feel good. It's like, okay, well, this is really started boils, my blood is boiling, right? Because I am not responsible for emotional regulation. That's like on you, right? There is this part where it is important for you to understand, um, your boss also has a job that they need to do. When you can understand what is their view, what is their needs, and where do they need you, and you can figure out together with them how you can help them, that helps a lot. And my experience is that a lot of this corporate bullshit really boils down to communication and the clarity of that communication
Yes.
and knowing what is actually needed from whom, by when, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, I think you're right. And maybe there's a formula there to really manage office politics. It's about clarity of vision and communication, right? And I like that. Like I like what you're saying because like now I'm learning stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I could be a bit more clear. I'm gonna assume good faith and good intellect until I'm proven
Yes.
wrong. Because I like to think that the people around me, especially the people I work with, have just as much sense, if not more sense, than me. And sometimes that's true, but there have been a handful of times, especially when things are a bit crunchy, where it's not
Yeah.
true, where they're just reacting. And I'm like, what do I do? What do I do with this?
I agree with you. It's very easy in those situations to get overwhelmed. So what happens very often, because there's so much, there's a crunch, like, there's deadlines and so on. Then that clarity of communication becomes the most important thing. It's true, no matter where you are in your life, you will not always work with people who are clear communicators. And sometimes you will not be a very clear communicator yourself, right? But there's certain things that you can do to sort of the way you ask people to help you. You need to understand what is it that needs to be done, when does it need to be done, and if there's any specific way, how does it need to be done. And that means, how does it need to be done also means, like, if I'm delivering this work, why is this work important? Help me understand this presentation that I'm making for the approval of this budget. How is it going to make someone think about this money that I'm asking for in the bigger context, right? So then when you know what needs to be done, how to do it, and when to deliver it, you have a very clear basis of like, hey, if I communicate that to whoever, the person that I'm leading or the person that is leading me, and get their agreement that yes, we have a common understanding of what is needed, and then we commit to this, that this is what I will do and this is by when I will do it, then that's the clarity, right? That's, hey, I know why I'm here in a way.
Exactly. Then I think you're getting to how we deal with it, right? If I had to put a title on what you said, I think that's the anchor to purpose. Anchor to purpose, that's how you manage it. It's like, we're doing this, help us understand how this translates to success on company goals, team goals, etc. And one of the questions I asked, or one of the questions I was equipped with one of my mentors was, in 6 months, will this matter? I constantly think about that. I ask that sparingly, especially if we're in strategy sessions. I'm like, is this going to matter in 6 months, or is this something performative? Is this something that we just want to put on a deck or a poster and say that we did it, call that a success, and be performative to the higher ups, say, yeah, we did this, when really, you didn't do anything except record a data point, right? It's kind of like anchoring back to purpose.
Yeah.
Where help us understand, does it make sense to the overall goal? I
No,
think that's what you're
absolutely. And I
getting at.
think, yes, and I love that you added to this purpose, because it comes back to the topic we discussed before, is that when you understand how your work is contributing, and when you understand what is the perceived impact of your work, and you see that you're making progress towards that purpose. The worst thing that happens in work is when you don't see any progress, when you see like, hey, I'm just like doing the same thing. Maybe it's like third angle we're trying. It doesn't move the needle. And yet there is another time we're going to try and push this new feature. We did like 5 different iterations of this feature and none of them worked. Why is this one going to work? You can end up with those situations in a corporate startup, scale up, whatever, you name it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I guess that kind of goes to the implications of being in an office that is overtly political. One of my thoughts is you become overly cynical. That at least I know I have experience in doing that, where it's like, hey guys, at this point we're just trying things to try things. Can we really just take a moment to can we just really take a moment to like critically, originally on what the goal is and what are some solutions that could affect the needle, right? And it's just and I remember I remember distinctly going through one of these sessions, and my direct manager at the time was like, I just want everybody to speak. And I'm like, yeah, but why? We're not going to do anything about it. I was so negative because, I mean, you've heard these ideas at least 4 times in the last 9 months, and yet we've not done anything. So help me understand why spending the next 4 hours doing this is going to affect, because we already know the goal. And unfortunately, the goalpost keeps moving. So it's like, what are we going to do? And I've got to deserve the talking to, but I was right. So what I'm trying to get at is some of the implications of being in an overly political environment is that you become kind of a cynic, right? At least for me, and I think I'm pretty emotionally intelligent. It reduces the threshold for you to be very calm and collected.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is true. And it's also the very interesting part where, it's also partly cultural, right? In some cultures, expressing anger and dissatisfaction is common. Yeah, especially in the more individualistic Western countries, displaying anger and dissatisfaction is not very well received. So that goes more into cultural differences between different places. But what I wanted to add is I had an example of what you were talking about. And I remember this once doing one of these big quarterly planning sessions, and as they usually are, and I went there and it was a big team, so we're around 50 people in the room, saying like, okay, well, with this team, we're gonna this quarter is gonna be like stop and think quarter. And then, of course, what I meant is that we just need to consolidate what we've been working on and push some things forward. Not that no work is going to be done, but I completely missed. I got so much feedback afterwards. It's like, nobody approved that we're going to stop the work. I'm like, okay, cool. My bad. I didn't communicate clearly, but I remember that very vividly, saying like, okay. I need to work on how do I get this message that it's not that we're all going home and good luck this quarter. It's more that we just want to, finish up the stuff and push it through to production rather than start building new things that we don't know what they are based on, and we need more feedback from users and customers. It was one of those moments when I remember I was just like feeling like, it's like, be to the point and no BS, as I usually am in my communication. But there is a part where you actually have to give this message. The way that it sounds to you is not how it's going to sound to the whole room, right? So that is something you have to build in a sense. And when you are within an organization for a longer time, you kind of know what gets which responses, right? So you can tune into that more. And it's not to say what you mean and say what you are actually going to do. That's not the point, right? Because if you have to say what is the work and how do you see that work contributing to the goal for the year, 3 years, and so on. But it's more about the way you communicate it that is super clear for everyone, and that there are no misunderstandings about what do you mean by stop and think versus what do you mean by consolidate. That can be interpreted very differently, and you need to have a sense of how people are going to understand what you're saying.
Exactly. And it goes back to the clarity that you mentioned.
Yeah.
In my experience with organizations, both big and small, definitions vary, especially if you
Mhm.
work with an international team.
Yeah.
That was even more when I started working with international teams. That was even more of a lesson. I'm like, oh my God, like, just you use the word consolidate, right? If I use the word
Mhm.
consolidate, especially early in my career, that was a very cut and dry. Like we're just making sure we're centralizing certain things. And then when I moved to an international team, they're all like, "You're selling parts of the business," and I was like, "No, who said that?"
Yeah, exactly. So it sometimes feels stupid, but just being clear in your communication, meaning sometimes really adding the definition. So it's like, when I mean consolidate, what I'm talking about is this, right? Because this is something that happens a lot. Like things are super clear for you in your head,
Yeah,
or for me in my head, because I've been thinking about them for like, months. But then I'm trying to express and communicate them to people who are very often it's the first time they hear that, right?
yeah,
Especially if I did the planning with my team, we had all the back and forth and kind of went to the place where we are okay. Like this is what we agree to, or agree to disagree in some cases. To like this is what we're gonna do. But then you might need to go to a different part of the organization and present that. And it might be the first time they hear it, or it might be then. And let's be honest, when you are in those sessions, half of the people are sleeping through it anyway, and
exactly.
then that's part of the
Yeah,
corporate algorithms.
uh,
And then when there are those trigger words. They
exactly.
will listen like they will hear the trigger word and they're like, aha.
Yeah. But that also makes me ask the question. So these exercises, they're rampant in every
Mhm.
organizations. I don't care, startups, scale ups, large organizations, et cetera, right? So you run these sessions, these so-called strategy sessions, and then you
Mhm.
cascade these messages in your team. And it's just like, okay, I have to ask myself, I'm going to ask you too. At one point, do we decide whether this is more progressive versus performative? Meaning, is this conversation going to inspire actual change? Or is this just kind of a tick exercise of the quarter, of the, biannual, things like a clock, things like that. So it's like this falls under the umbrella of politics, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what do we do? Is this progressive? Is this formative? Is it both? Is it neither?
Yeah, I think it really depends, right? Because it really aligns to the purpose. And very honestly, I have not been in many of those sessions in my career that were progressive and moving us forward and bringing that clarity. It was usually like, okay, well, it's the end of the quarter. We got to do the planning
Yeah.
and let's try and be efficient this time. And that would bother me, and it happens in a lot of organizations, that it's like really quarter by quarter by quarter by quarter. And then it's like, hey, but if every quarter is a little bit different, then what's going to happen in 3 years? Where are we really going? And what's the idea? And that is the part that, and you can reshape that, right? But I also want to underline that you can be in an organization where you have to do performative actions, but you are still responsible for yourself on how do you perform those actions.
Yeah.
If you are a person working in a product team, let's say you're a product manager, and it is your job to say every quarter, what is it that you're going to do this quarter? There is nothing, absolutely nothing stopping you from having a vision and strategy that is aligned with the business that you have for the next 3 years. It might change. And if you actually do that work and you have that work and you thought through this and you have that process like clearly, in your head, aligned with your team, then those performative exercises are just a simple thing of like, this is what we're gonna do now. This is what we learned. So maybe we need to shift something. But it can become very easy. So just because you're part of this theater, it doesn't mean that you have to do it on the rules that everyone else is doing. You can create your own rules. As you do it, you can over time change. And
Exactly.
if you are the person who can, through this process, that you are moving those like, hamster wheels in a way that is okay for you, and you are just ticking the box, but on the side you have your own thing, you can change the culture. You build the trust when you start to like, actually the work that you are doing is matters, and you don't play the politics, but the quality of the work that you are delivering matters. At some point in your career, you will be able to step out of the politics because
Exactly.
people will trust the outputs and outcomes you create.
Exactly. What you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, is that, yes, you're going to have to go through these performative actions. It's a rule or a feature of the business, right? But the difference in how you can circumnavigate that or how you can sit within your own ethos is that you can actually create some actionable items within your team, creating your mini ecosystem. And ultimately, over time, it'll add up to a pretty large sum in a year, 2 years, 3 years. Correct?
Absolutely.
I
Exactly.
like,
As you grow in your career, there's a bigger circle of things you can control and influence. You can influence on how to do things within like your team, right? It's no one way of leading the team. There's no one way of for the team to perform. And just because someone else's team in the company is performing differently, it doesn't mean that you have to do it exactly the same thing. And we all know that, right? That in their different teams have different cultures. Like every company has a big culture that they say that culture is just the way that people behave when they are together. But in this, there's subcultures in the teams, and that's normal, right? Because those are people who work closer together, and you are responsible for that. And you can tweak it into what you want it to be, what works for you, and what is aligned with you. If you really want all the freedom and just do things the way you want, and you don't want anyone telling you things, then do your own thing. Have your own company. Whenever you enter a certain company, there are certain corporate games you're going to have to play.
yes,
And be mindful and understand that this is the games that you will have to play, and then decide how you play them. The way that you play those games is absolutely up to you.
exactly. And I like that because you recently you're like, hey, this is the game that you're playing, but the difference between the other players and you is you. So
Yeah,
it's like, hey, how can you get through this and love and appreciate the person in the mirror? And how can I get through this knowing that I did my best? And at the end of the day, the things that didn't matter in 3, 6 months, I didn't let that bother me. I was looking at
yeah.
the bigger picture. I was looking at the down game or the end game.
Yes, exactly. So it's also what we were discussing in previous episodes, like understanding what you want, and then understanding the environment where you are and how does it work, and so on, and how
Exactly.
can you be the way you want in the environment where you are.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing, and you can challenge me on this, but for the most part, people are working for another company, another person's vision, another person's product or service. So I think it's important to understand and drive home the point that there's not going to be all the opportunity for you to live within your ethos to do everything that you want. Because again, what Carolina said, if you want to do that, you need to do your own thing, start your own company. So you need to be able to navigate within this organization, within their brand of politics, and match that against what you can bring to the table, what your ethos are, and things like that, and decide if this is the company for you. And there's
Yeah.
trade off, right? So if you're in a position to say it's not a company for me, go get another job, go talk to another recruiter, et cetera. I understand there's a certain privilege with that, right? You just need to understand that you're not going to be able to do 100% of what you want to do within this political game because doing nothing is doing something and
Yeah,
doing everything is not playing the game smart.
exactly. And I guess that's the point. Just play it as you want to play it, but be conscious of what you're playing.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know what to say here. It's not like politics is, I think it's amoral, first of all.
Mm.
I think it's not good or bad. It's just,
Mm,
it's the reality, right? I think what makes it moral or not is your approach to it, right?
yeah,
Is the people's approach to it. So really just keep that in mind.
exactly. At the end of the day, there's only one person you need to be worried about disappointing, and that is yourself.
Exactly.
And then you got to live with yourself for your whole life. So do what feels right. Is
All
there
right.
anything else that you think on this topic that you would like to live with?
No, I think we said everything we can, at least for this episode. Obviously, it's a huge topic, but I think we're good. Again, if I had to wrap up here, politics is a feature, not a bug, meaning it's needed. If you want to live within your ethos, live within your authenticity, you just got to know your limits of playing the game. And you have to know that you do need to play the game, whether you're doing it or not. So those are two key points. Any other
Yeah.
point you want to drive home?
Just that the game is there, and no matter what the game is, you still have the choice and responsibility to play it like you want to play it.
Exactly.
And you're not going to escape it. Yeah, that's the thing. All right, DJ, thank you so much. This was a really good conversation, and I hope it brings clarity.
Thanks, Carolina.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.